Is the Volcker rule being played out in that House Senate Conference Committee meetings? Joining us, Democratic Congressman Paul Kanjorski of Pennsylvania, a member of that committee. Welcome back, Congressman Kanjorski. Good to have you.
Pleasure to be here.
Let's talk a little bit about not the Volcker rule, but the Lincoln rule, which would take the swaps desks and move them out. It sounds this morning as though Mr. Volcker opined that maybe you don't have to completely separate the swaps desk, but you can set them up as separately capitalized subsidiaries of a bank holding company. Does that work for you?
Well, it works to a degree. I think it's acceptable because what our problem was primarily with swaps was AIG. And we weren't well capitalized. It wasn't well capitalized in the unit it was dealing with in the derivative business. I think if we separate that out, well capitalize it, and then have the regulators examine it very thoroughly and keep on top of it, it can be accomplished. And this is only done by the very largest banks.
The Volcker rule, where does that stand? And I know that you favor it, and you think it is a rather surgical approach to sort of restoring what was at the heart of the old Glass-Steagall law, right?
Absolutely. I think it's essential that we have the Volcker rule. I think we will have the Volcker rule. I think what's nice about this whole process now that we're down to the final conference is the American people will be able to have their thoughts heard by their representatives and senators. And I think I'm hearing, at least from the people I talk to, that they appreciate the importance of the Volcker rule. They appreciate the importance of Lincoln's position, and quite frankly, and too big to fail my amendment that's pending also.
Explain to me just quickly, and then I'll pass the baton to my friends here, the idea of how this Volcker rule would work in practice. Let's say you are a large bank that owns a hedge fund subsidiary within the bank. Are those companies going to have a period of years during which they can divest that operation?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I met with Paul Volcker about 3 days ago, and we discussed that at quite a bit of length. And the best recollection I had when there was a required federal divestiture of DuPont from General Motors, and this is back in the 1950s, there was a grant of about 15 years to allow that divestiture. There's a lot of precedent for that to happen. You couldn't do this overnight. One bank that I met with has a 25% equity investment in a hedge fund. And if you try to dump that on the market or get rid of it overnight, you could cause your own shocks by just doing that.
Congressman Kanjorski, great op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today about all the efforts to regulate. And when you look at all the numerous institutions that exist to regulate the financial industry, there's like 100 of them. And yet still, we get problems. What confidence can the American people have in your ability, Congress collectively, I mean, to actually get this right this time?
Well, I don't know if there's ever any real right. There's no perfection. There's no magic bullet. What we're trying to do is look at all the weaknesses and all the faults that occurred in a system that became 75 years old since our last reform and correct those, and then try and anticipate for the future, but no one can foresee what kind of products, what kind of institutions, or how markets change in the future. I believe if we go through this process that we're in right now and keep most of the pertinent and important phases of it, we will have established a reformed regulatory scheme that could last 50 to 75 years as the last one did.
Congressman, could you weigh in on the Washington Post article this morning talking about the fact that a number of lawmakers may have legislation pending about certain types of instruments or parts of the market, and yet in their own personal or family accounts they have investments that may be impacted by that particular legislation? You look at gold, and Representative Paul holds gold stocks. Appropriate or inappropriate? We should note that there's nothing against the law or illegal about that, but there are those who wonder whether or not it's a case of you have to have skin in the game when you're making legislation about a particular area, or whether or not it's inappropriate.
Well, everyone has to make their own decision on that. I find most of the representatives are quite honorable, but it is an area where I myself, when I got on the banking committee very early in my career, I made the decided decision to divest myself of any involvement in equities or bonds. So all of my portfolio is in government securities. I rise or fall with the government. And I do that because I don't want to get and have to possess inside information that I'm not even aware of at the moment that it's inside information, and then use it. This way, by being removed, you don't have that possibility.
So you in your own personal accounts hold only government securities, but would you like to see the rules governing Congresspeople changed so that these kinds of potential conflicts don't exist?
Well, you know, if you do that, we'd lose an awful lot of our Republican friends. No, I'm just being facetious there. But we lose an awful lot of our senators because many of them are quite wealthy. It's a tough question. It's not easy. It's something that should be examined. I think disclosure is the most important thing. And I think it's up to you in the press to really look at these things, expose them, discuss them, and if you see any conflicts that appear, to advertise them. I think that's probably in a free society the best we can do.
All right, Congressman Kanjorski, thank you very much for joining us today.